Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the May meeting of the Public Board. And we have apologies from Jora Gill and Malta, both of whom are abroad. I want to welcome Amanda Haynes today. Amanda is the chair of our Disability Equality Network. Amanda, do you just want to very briefly introduce the network to people? Are you made to put your microphone on?
I'm the chair of the Disability Equality Network for colleagues within CQC, and we engage regularly with about 160 colleagues that we know about, but we also understand that there are a number of colleagues which don't register with the network, and but we do not exclude those from any of our literature, so we're really out there. Been in post for 3 years, but my day job is I'm an inspector, so I inspect dentists.
Thank you, Amanda, and you're very welcome to the board meeting today. I also need to welcome Kate Taroney, our Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care. You were here at the last meeting as an observer. You're now here properly in your own right, and you're extremely welcome. Right, that takes us on to declarations of interest. Is there anything anybody needs to declare? Very good. Minutes of the meeting of the 24th of April, are they a true and accurate record of all we discussed? Excellent. They are therefore approved. On the action log, there was one item which has been completed. Was there any other business, any other matter arising is what I meant to say. Anybody wanted to raise? Perfect. In which case, let's move straight on to the executive team's report. Ian.
Thanks, Peter. I'd like to begin by talking about our response to the Public Accounts Committee. Board members will recall that the Public Accounts Committee conducted an investigation into the CQC performance in December 2017, and since then we have written to the committee to update them on our performance. We wrote again in April, and our copy of our letter is available in the public domain at parliament.uk, and it goes through a series of updates on our overall performance, particularly focused on report timeliness, which was an area that I know the committee were particularly interested in. So I'm happy to take questions on any aspect of that. It also, I thought there was an opportunity just to update on our market oversight team. Our market oversight team have continued to be active, and I'm at the moment we have no organisations at stage 6 in market oversight. Stage 6, as board members will recall, is the stage where we have a concern about a large provider who has undergone both business failure and service cessation was likely. We have no providers in that position at present. Thank you, Peter. Before I'll pause there for questions before handing over to Kate.
Questions, anybody? Lewis?
Thanks very much. Can I just ask then, while we're in public session, for an update on issues arising from the situation with Four Seasons that's been quite widely reported in the press, recognising obviously the sensitivities of some of the information.
Yes, of course, as you rightly point out, there's a limit to what we can say in the public domain, but it's been widely reported in the press that the holding company of Four Seasons has gone into administration. We are aware of that, and our market oversight team were and continue to work closely with the management team at Four Seasons. Based on the information we have to hand, we have no concern at this stage that service is likely to cease. And on that basis, we note the fact that the business is in administration, but we have no concerns around members of the public being at risk at this point. But obviously, we'll continue to work closely with people and update local authorities as necessary should the situation change.
Good, thank you. Where are we going next?
Kate.
Kate.
So just to draw the board's attention to an up-and-coming refresh of existing information about people's rights to access and visit relatives or loved ones within care homes. So that will be made available shortly. The next up-and-coming report is very much a joint effort between primary medical services and adult social care, which has been a focus on people's oral health care needs within residential care homes. That report is due to be published in June.
Can I just add to that, because I think it has been a really good example of the cross-sector working that we need to do more of, and it's been a very successful project in terms of understanding how we bring the knowledge of two sectors together. So.
Good. Sorry, yeah.
Just from an external perspective as well, NICE are obviously very pleased that we've done this work, and are going to use the report itself to demonstrate the impact of their own guidance. So they're very pleased that we've done it. They're very pleased about the way we've carried it out, and I think that the evidence is strong around how well or not organisations have used their guidance. So they're pleased on our behalf for running it.
So Amanda, were you just drawing my attention to Chris? You won't actually want to speak. Okay, fine. Thank you. Ted.
Just to note, we gave written evidence to the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee on eating disorder services, and our evidence highlighted that they are not one of our core services for inspection, but we do inspect them when indicated as an additional service, and we gave an example of a service we had inspected on that basis. We also highlighted the work we've done on learning from deaths, and our recent report on that demonstrating that more work is necessary in terms of culture change in organisations to make sure that lessons are learned when patients sadly die, and our work on assessing mental health care in acute hospitals, which both we thought were relevant to the NHS eating disorder services. The evidence we gave is now published on the committee's website. My understanding at the moment is they're not going to have an oral hearing following the evidence.
Thanks, Ted. Any other questions on the executive team's report? Yep,
Chris,
go on.
Chris, to talk about the final section.
Oh, sorry. Chris, beg your pardon.
Surplus. So in years, it's slight error. That's not 1920.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, too many Chris's. Sorry, Chris. I think it's.
We will come to.
Yeah. Thank you. So this is just to make the board aware of a new digital platform that we're currently trialling to gather the views of people who use services, providers and other stakeholders. We've got a long tradition of involving all those groups in our work. What we wanted to do was to explore a new platform to be able to share more information in real time, and also to take comment on some of our reports and some of our thinking as we develop it. So this is very much sort of fitting with the agile philosophy of testing and trying, working with each group. So we've had a really strong sign up from both people who use services, providers and other stakeholders, and we'll be bringing back to the board the fruits of that through the engagement that we do. I'm very hopeful that it'll be in addition to what we already do around co-production and face-to-face engagement with all of those groups, but it will offer us more in terms of real-time engagement with all audiences.
Right, so anything else on the executive team's report before we go to Mr. Usher? Right, Chris, start again. Oh, I'm not doing very well today. Right.
Sorry, this is mine. So the next paper is the performance report. Whilst the accounts are not yet fully closed, the operational performance is largely will land as written in this report. So before I move to the individual directors, just talk briefly about performance highlights in their area. I thought I'd just say a few words around the performance story as a whole. One of the things that we sometimes forget is we do around 70 inspections a day in the organisation. So you know, what we do is pretty high volume, and we sometimes forget that. And I think the story of performance this year is of a gradually improving trend, and I'm being particularly particularly impressed with the performance that the teams have delivered in the final quarter of this year. And individual inspectors in particular will talk to us about that shortly. I think we've also got a story here of a change program which has really begun to crystallise. So not only are we working on so-called business as usual performance, which is improved, but I think we've made great strides in crystallising the change activity which we'll be doing during 1920, and we've seen that starting to get to a point now where we've got a clear view of that. And we've reported here in the last few months, in particular, on where we are with that. So, I think some positive stories. I think there are still some challenges. Undoubtedly, I still think we need to do more around making sure our reports are on time, and some of those sorts of things internally. But I think it is still true, though, that the overall quality of the work that's being done by providers is improving. I think what we're seeing is we're contributing in a small way to the improvement of health and social care across this country. So in terms of the impact that we are having on people in this country, I still think it is a positive and improving trend. And I think that's a real testament to all of the people that work in health and social care, as well as our own teams. So with that, Peter, can I hand over to the directors one at a time, just to say a couple of words about their performance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if I can just start off with a kind of comment on outcomes for people. So it very much follows on from Ian's opening remarks. So if we look at quality in adult social care over the last 3 years, you'll see a trend that you'll be well familiar with, which is a reduction in inadequate and requires improving providers, and an increase in the number of good providers. So that's good news. It's good outcomes for individuals. An area of interest that we continue to keep our focus on are those providers. About 25% of our good providers don't consistently stay in that rating, so they sometimes drop down to requires improvement and then come back up again. There is a well-developed methodology within ASC about supporting those providers who kind of yo-yo back and forth between RI and good. But actually, I think there's more we can do around leaning that approach. So there's an area of focus on that. But broadly, outcomes for people receiving adult social care in England is an improving story over the last 3 years. Debbie Westhead, the interim Chief Inspector, has led some really good work in ASC about making our processes leaner, having shorter assessments, and having a more flexible approach to our workforce, where there may be a part of the country where there are less inspectors for a variety of reasons, but actually being able to move our workforce resource around to make sure that we keep on top of our inspections. So what you'll see in slide 16 or 27, depending on which slide deck you're looking at, is you'll see that there is evidence of increased productivity. So a reduction in capacity as planned, but an increase in the number of inspections that are happening, which reflects that kind of leaner way of working. And then final comment on ASC performance is a real planned, targeted focus on clearing the backlog of those inspections that were 75 days plus overdue. So you'll see that number having significantly reduced down as we focused our efforts on that. So good news story and progress, but still lots to do to ensure that we continue to hit that, particularly that timeliness of reports going through this financial year.
Good. Do we want to pause there? Any questions for Kate? Lewis?
Well, I've got a more general question about ratings, which might be better to.
Okay, we'll come back in that case. Rosie, we'll go to you then.
Thank you, Peter. So in PMS, everything in terms of performance is generally going very well. We've got 92% of our inspection reports being published within 50 working days, and the number of days that it has taken to publish those reports has reduced over the year from 31 to 27, which is good. I'm really pleased Amanda's here today as one of our dentistry inspectors, because actually our dental team do a fantastic job and continue to deliver a really high standard and meet all of their KPIs and have a huge programme of work. So I'd like to say thank you take the opportunity while Amanda's here to say thank you to the dental team. I'm keen as we go forward to explore what's happening with the deterioration of some of our good practices. We have a high level of good and outstanding practices in PMS. If you look at slide 28, we are having some practices that are deteriorating from that position, and we need to understand what's underlying that. So that's something I want to explore in more detail over the next few months. We are having a continued focus on productivity and consistency within the Directorate, because I think that's something we need to continually work at and improve. But generally, we continue to work with our quality improvement teams across PMS to make sure that is a continuing improving situation. So, thank you.
So, any quick questions for Rosie? No? Right. So, Ted.
Thank you, Peter. As I've highlighted before to the board, we achieved our targets of number of inspections during the last financial year, and we've made great progress in improving the turnover of our inspection reports. We've got to a plateau in that now. We're doing a lot of work to improve the process, and I'm confident that within a few months we should be able to move to a much higher level and get to the target during the financial year. A lot of work is going on that. I'm very pleased with the work all my inspectors have been doing. At the moment, they're working around standardised statements, which follows on very much from the work in ASC, which we've learned from. And I think there's a real opportunity to push forward on that going forward. So that in terms of performance, that's our main focus at the moment. In terms of the outcomes for trusts, if you look at slide 22, you will see, and we touched on this last time, but just to emphasise again, the trend continues, is that there is a steady increase in the proportion of services that are good or outstanding going forward. And this is in a sector where a lot of services face a great deal of workforce pressure, workload pressure, and financial constraints. And I think we should pay great credit to the frontline teams in those clinical services that are driving improvement. I have no doubt that our reports are an important impetus for that improvement. But having said that, the work is theirs, and I think we should show them respect for that. But there is, and I was at an inspection only last week, where we were talking about the well-led with the board of an organisation, and the quality of the debate about leadership and culture is radically different from where it was a few years ago. And I think a lot of that is because of what we've done in our reports and our ratings to highlight the importance of leadership, culture and engagement in driving high-quality care. And I think we have changed the terms of the debate, and we've changed the sense of what good leadership in the NHS is about. We need to do more on that. And interestingly, we are just about to publish a report on independent health, where we make exactly the same points, that the independent health organisations, the acute hospitals that have improved because of leadership and culture and engagement of frontline staff. We've got some really good examples of that, and hopefully that will be out shortly to reflect what we've already found in NHS hospitals and mental health trusts as well. Can I refer you to to slide 27? This looks at the ratings by different sectors within hospitals. And the general pattern of all sectors improving is important. It is there. All sectors are improving month on month, and every month we see services improve. But I think the biggest concern still remains around acute services in acute hospital trusts. You'll see in the middle there that we've got 45% of acute hospital trust services are still requires improvement or inadequate. And a lot of that is focused around these services that are under so much pressure at the moment. and I think we need to recognise that those services are under pressure. We are providing as much support as we can for them to improve, but they do have a formidable task to do so. But across the board, there is improvement going forward. And if you turn over to the next slide, page 28, you'll see where there's evidence of, we've asked the question, do locations rated good and deteriorate? And I think one of the really strong things we've found is that once services get to good or outstanding, they tend to maintain that rating. We don't see a lot of services falling from. We do occasionally see services whose rating deteriorates, but it is not a common finding. And I think that is really encouraging, that services that have shown improvement have sustained improvement. And a lot of improvement we've seen in previous times has been temporary, and once the focus moves on, the quality of care deteriorates again. But we are seeing sustained quality of improvements in many services. And just going on to the next slide, do locations rated requires improvement? This is slide 29. Improve. The answer is, in hospitals, about a third of them do. About a third of them improve on ratings on re-inspection overall. You see it varies between acute trusts and mental health trusts and independent, but it's about a third overall. Those that don't improve their rating from requires improvement, about half of them actually they do improve, but they don't improve sufficiently to jump a rating. And I think they are doing the right thing. We do see a residual of services that are stuck at requires improvement and do not seem to be making progress. And I think those are my chief concern and the ones we're focused on going forward.
Thank you, Ted. So is there anything for Ted before we open up more widely to the sort of overall performance? John?
Thank you, Ted. And I'm pleased that some of the lessons learnt from ASC are being imported, and I look forward to the figures in 2 months being better. One of the other key lessons there was also that, having created the new way of doing things, there was a very systematized mechanism of communication and facilitation for implementation across the whole of their inspectorate workforce. Have you also imported that?
Indeed we have, and we're working very hard on the engagement of staff around the standard judgment statements that we talked about at the moment, and we're having a lot of communication with them on that. And they, I think, are generally very welcoming of the approach. So I'm very, very, very hopeful that it will be widely adopted quite rapidly. We've asked staff over the current period to introduce them gradually, but we expect them all to be fully implemented by July, when we hope we'll see an impact on performance. Of course, the reports are in progress, so it will work through in figures beyond that, but I hope we will be seeing changes by July.
Liz?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. A very specific question. I noticed there's been a slight increase in Mental Health Act visits, and I seem to recall that last year there'd been a slight decline, and it wasn't in. There were various possible reasons why there'd been a decline, and I just wondered whether there's a story behind that. Have we been trying to make sure that we up those numbers, or is there some other reason for that? I just really want to be assured that we're doing sufficient visits for people who are in that sort of fairly vulnerable situation.
Yes, and you'll notice as well that the SOAD, we're not quite on our target, but we have improved performance on that. And again, that's down to the local team developing that. In terms of mental health act visits, there is a steady increase over time, and so we may see some ups and downs on occasion, but there is a steady increase in demand. And I think one of our concerns about that work is that there is a steady increase in demand for us, and the team need to work very hard to keep up with the demand.
So, having said we'll open it up, let's actually go to Kirsty and then ultimately to Chris, who's been having several goes at trying to come in here, and then we'll open it up for overall performance. So, Kirsty, to you.
Thank you, Peter. I was not going to talk about our change activity, apart from to say that we've been doing a lot of work around building our foundations this year. I think we've got a really clear understanding of what our portfolio of work is going forwards, timeline to deliver that, and we're now putting the resources in place. But what I did want to do is just pick up on our registration activity, just to highlight some really good work that's going on in that space this year, and I think it's starting to pay dividends now in at the back end of this year in terms of the performance, but I'm really confident that it will start to really show as we move through this coming year. We've been really working hard looking at how our registration processes work and how we can really lean out those processes. We've been working, really embracing the sort of quality improvement mentality. We've been bringing multidisciplinary teams together to look at very specific problems, running sort of 2-day sprints where we've mapped out the process and then redesigned it there and then and put it into and then the very next day put it into a sandbox for testing to check it out, see if it'll work, and then rolling it into live. And this has really started to make some difference. So if you look at the rejection rates, if you look at March performance there, that's really shown a marked improvement as we've started to roll that out. We've got a number of other areas where we're working on that for sort of low-risk registration activity where we're adding or removing providers. We've moved a lot of work from the inspectors into the National Call Centre where they're able to take a very consistent and process-driven approach to really driving out performance there. And I think it's something that we will want to sort of show a bit more of, as it's a really good way of working and one that we really want to do more of as we move forwards.
I think it's really, really encouraging. Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask a question on the application volumes on slide 7, I think it is. And you may have answered this question previously, and I've forgotten what the answer is, but we seem to have an increase from about roughly 3,300 over the first 9 months of the year to around 4,400 in the last 3 months. What was the reasoning behind that? I mean, it's very stark.
Yes, I think I have answered that question, but I'm not sure what the answer was. I think there's been some. I can't remember. I'm going to find it out and bring it back to you. But there's been some change in what we're actually registering. So we're getting a lot more requests in for registering specific types of activity or registered managers. So I will get the detail and let you know. But it's staying constant, and we haven't increased our resources to deal with that as well. So I think that's an important point to flag.
Okay, Chris. At last, your moment.
Slightly anti-climax update, but so financially, it's still subject to end-of-year audit, but we believe we've ended the year with the surplus of 1.4 million, which is 0.6%. Within that, we've exceeded expenditure by 2.9%, which is within our 2% KPI. We've also had a surplus on income of 4.4 million, which is 2%. So that's a combination of growth in certain sectors, but also there's a chunk of that is just around accounting treatment, so it kind of masks the overspend on expenditure and the underspend on income. But overall surplus of 1.4 million subject to end-of-year audit.
Okay. Any questions on finance? Ian.
It's not a question, just on paragraph 4.1, I think that should read 2018-19, not 19-20.
Correct. Just again, getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, quite happy if you repeat it for 1920, by the way. Lewis, at last, your overall question.
Thanks very much. First of all, thank you very much to all the chief executives, obviously thinking carefully about the issue of improvement since our discussion last time round. That conversation was partly prompted by the performance report looking like the figures didn't change very much from one reporting time to another. And because of that, I asked our performance people if they could give me some more detail behind the figures. And they did that, so that was very helpful. I must say, I've got much more detailed information. And this is an area, I think, in the next phase of CQC strategy, which I think we do need to be thinking quite closely about, because it does tell a slightly different story of from the one of constant improvement that we've just been hearing about. It's not a bad story. There has been improvement. So in other words, if you look at the ratings nationally of provider organisations, they have steadily got better. And that does suggest that something about improvement working, and maybe CQC's contribution to that's been important. So that's the reasonable inference. But the improvements were mainly in the early part of the the period of the inspection period. The most recent figures don't show very much change. And one of the reasons for that is that, I suspect, is that we already have so many organisations rated good that it's quite hard for the figures to get that much better. Okay, they could get a little bit better, and they are getting a little bit better. But mostly they're staying more or less where they were. So if we take PMS, for example, the figures for the last 2 to 3 years are more or less the same. You wouldn't really say there's much. The same is true of adult social care. It's a little bit different in hospitals, actually, where there has been a more obvious improvement, although some of that is related to a particular bit of the hospital scene, which is specialist NHS trusts, which have made had quite a big improvement. So I'm not saying this just to cast doubt on what people have said. I'm just saying that it's complicated, and some of it is about the way we've gone about ratings in general. We've got so many organisations that are good that it makes it quite difficult to monitor what's changing. But what we can see is that very few organisations, having got a good rating, have then gone on to get an outstanding rating. So that stability of the ratings that you're referring to is not necessarily a good thing. It suggests that not many stretch on to the next level. And there just are a number of areas of that kind that I think these figures deserve a closer scrutiny. So this is not to criticise the performance of any sector. I think what the evidence is that care generally is good across most sectors, most of the time. It is, I think, to make us question whether in the next phase our approach can be simply repeated in the same way. And understanding the change, which people touched on, is going to be crucial. Understanding the incentive to change in provider organisations and how big they see the hurdle, how big they see the step up to excellence from having got to a certain level of sort of satisfactory performance. Those are going to be critical issues, I think, for us next time round. And I feel we have, I suppose, skirted around this issue a little bit. We've talked a little bit about understanding improvement, and we've got a bit of understanding of it. We tend to fall back on leadership, but exactly what is it about leadership that makes those differences? There are some differences and some questions for us, I think, which shouldn't make us too satisfied with where we are at the moment. We shouldn't be too satisfied with the recent improvement, because there isn't very much. We shouldn't be satisfied with the fact that so many places are good, because they're not. They seem to be remaining good, not going up. And that is something that we should be prepared to address. I have to say that I've been mentioning this a few times, and I regard it as a sort of personal failure on my part that I'm still asking the same question. And this will probably be the last time I ask that question. So, but I do think it is a crucial one for the next period of CQC's evolution.
I have visions of you coming back after June as a member of the public to continue asking your questions, Lewis. So if you're saying that's the last time, I'll have it in writing if I may. Ted.
I have a different but related point.
Do you want to ask that? And then I think Ted was going to respond if it's related.
You know, I'm not promising to be the ghost of Lewis past, but I have drawn attention to the way that we present the figures in the past does not necessarily allow us to understand if there has been a system change that's an improvement, as opposed to just a month-on-month variation we should expect from the existing system. And I know there have been conversations about doing something about that. I've seen some interesting work done by Mark Edmonds and his team that would assist. And so my question is really picking up. We need to perhaps think about how the performance data is presented to allow us better to understand the changes that we hope will come from the portfolio and so on and so forth, and the transformation. And I just wondered if you could update us where the work and thinking is on how we might do stuff differently going forward in 1920.
So, Ted, did you want to come back on Lewis and then Ian on Kirsty?
Yes. I think Lewis is right in that we've been focusing on inadequate and requires improvement services, and they are continuing to improve. Those services that are good, we have seen an increase in the number of services which are outstanding. But having said that, we wouldn't expect a lot of services to go to outstanding. I'd argue if a lot of services went to outstanding, we were probably misjudging outstanding, because it must mean that it is a small proportion of the total. So in that sense, I think if we've got a lot of services to good, that is an important achievement. And I am more worried about those that are stuck at requires improvement, as I said earlier on, the ones as if you're not part of a bigger trend. And there's a kind of a big discussion we need to make beyond this, to saying if we're going to define improvement purely in terms of our ratings, is that sufficient? And do we need to look beyond our ratings to look at improvement? And I think that is probably work we need to do, because I think there's a problem if we only define improvement in our own terms, and we need to look at it in other people's terms as well. And I think that is a real challenge for us going forward.
So, can I just add my own thought on that? Well, two thoughts, which I think broadly support what both Ted and Lewis, you're both saying. When I did my pre-appointment hearing with the Health Select Committee back in 2015, I was asked what I thought success would look like, and my answer was that every service was good or better. In other words, that actually that would mean there was nothing that we were responsible for that was requiring improvement or worse. So there's a bit of me that says actually getting everything to good is where we should be, and that our concentration should be, as Ted's just said, on those services that aren't yet good. But the other point of it, and I think where you're coming from, Lewis, is that over the next 18 months or so, we are going to have, as a board, to be thinking about what our strategy after the present strategy will look like. And there are a whole range of things that will need to be factoring in. And I suspect that sort of philosophical discussion about how we view improvement and whether we think continuous and almost never-ending improvement is what we should be looking for, or whether our major effort ought to be in those services that are below good. So I think it's something we need to spend time on. Yeah.
That's an interesting point in a way about how many good should there be out there. There is another part to this, and I think this doesn't apply to the hospital sector, but it does apply to PMS and adult social care, which there could be a criticism that we've defined good so broadly that we have artificially made everywhere good. Because at the moment the good for good and outstanding for adult social care, but it's mainly good, is 84%. So 84% of adult social care provision is at that good or outstanding level. For PMS, it's 95%. So now, intrinsically, that just sounds a little bit implausible to me. That everywhere is that good practice is so good, and I don't think it's possible we're not helping the situation of improvement by drawing the line, the parameters of good so broadly that people are automatically in it when they may not deserve it, perhaps. But I don't mean to sound critical, but the tail of good may not be that good, and it's quite difficult to move out of it into something better. And so I take your point that everywhere being good or better is a good ambition, but we just need to make sure that it means the right thing and it means something consistent.
And I agree with you. Ted, sorry, do you want to come back?
Quality presumably follows a normal distribution. So if everywhere is good, I would say we probably set our expectations wrong because we're trying to improve. And I think this comes back to what Lewis was saying, that if everywhere is good, then how do we drive improvement? Well, it must be either pushing everywhere to outstanding or redefining what good is. And I think when we come to look at our strategy, we just need to think about that. And I think that there is a very good question, that Lewis has posed, and that is good in the three sectors comparable? Have we got that right? And I don't think we know the answer to that.
At the risk of prolonging this, I totally agree. All I'm saying is that we haven't actually got all the services that good yet. So let's get there. Kirsty, do you want to answer John's question?
Yes, thanks, Peter. So in terms of the work we're doing, we are working to more of a balanced scorecard approach. So we're looking to bring that forward for next month, I hope. And what we're keen to get to is analysis rather than just presenting data. So we're looking at different models, so things like standard deviations, SBC charts, and all that sort of thing to bring together a much clearer picture of what the actual issues are. As well as that, we're looking around, can we actually start to measure our impact and outcomes as well? So actually, rather than just counting numbers, what difference does that make? So there's a lot of work going on there. We're using the new Power BI tools to help us present that data in a better way, and it's much more interactive to enable people to drill down further into the information if they want to.
Sorry, Rosie.
Thank you. Just to pick up on the previous conversation, I'm really keen that we start to do some work to understand the ratings across all three sectors and make sure that we are consistent in how we're determining good and outstanding. In terms of improvement, I think we had an event recently with outstanding practices, and I think one of the key messages from that event was actually their relentless focus for improvement and never feeling that they were good enough. And I think that we need to somehow continue that, and I don't think getting an outstanding rating has stopped their foot on the pedal in terms of improvement. In fact, actually, I think it was their improvement culture that has given them that outstanding rating. And I guess the other point I just wanted to make is that with primary, and what I'd like to understand more is actually the changing landscape and the impact that that is having on the ratings. There's no doubt that it's not a static picture in terms of the primary care landscape in general practice at the moment. There's a lot of changes that are happening and have happened over the last few years and are going to continue to happen with primary care at scale providers, and we need to understand that and the impact that that's having on the ratings as well. So,
I agree. Chris.
Thank you. 2 points. Firstly, a bit like Lewis, I feel like I'm going to have to remind people of things that we did quite a long time ago. We didn't define good. Service users, providers define good. When we brought people together in 2014, it was that group of people that defined what good looked like. So I take your point about whether, and I think things would inevitably move on, and people's perception of what good looked like should and does change. But just to be really clear about where we've got to with all of these sectors, we've defined good with people who use services and with providers. So just to say that, because that's important. It's important to remember it. I think also to say the national stats. I agree with you. It would look static. It absolutely isn't. It's a combination of organisations changing between good and requires improvement. And I think the really interesting part of that is when you begin to break that down regionally, about how services change within a region across adult social care, primary care and hospitals. And I think it's useful for us not just to understand it at a sector level, but actually at a local level, because it's a people's experience of those services in combination. And if you see in the North East a gradual lowering in primary care, though the national picture is good, as an example, then actually that's important to note as well. So just to say, I don't think I don't think it's a static picture that it might appear on this presentation. I think the regional variation is important, but the good should always be what people who use services and what providers and ourselves working together believe is good, never just the regulator.
So, when I was reading the papers, I sort of stood back a bit from the detail, and I had sort of two high-level thoughts, which I think very much, Ian, were reflected by your introduction to this. And the first is the rather obvious one, just the scale of activity. 17,000 inspections is a lot of inspections. I know we all know that, but it really sort of hits you when you look at it over the year. And I think it is worth commending all our colleagues for being able to deliver 17,000 inspections and everything that goes with that and all the other things they do. So that was sort of one big thought. And then the other big thought was the trajectory on pretty well all our performance indicators is in the right direction, and some of it very markedly. So whilst I know everybody around this table are not the slightest bit complacent, and until we're hitting all of our KPIs, and then when we hit all our KPIs, the ghost of Lewis will come back and say, well, you need to reset them because it's not good enough. We'd probably agree with you, Lewis, if that happened. So we're absolutely not complacent. But I mean, I do think it's a tremendous achievement that the trajectory really is now moving in the right direction. So those were sort of two really big thoughts I took when I stood back from the detail, which we've been discussing. Is there anything else anybody wants to raise on the performance? Otherwise, can we just note the performance report, note the financial position subject to audit, and note the various action plans for where we are trying to improve performance. Sorry, Paul, you were going to come in?
Don't want to pour cold water on what you just said, but I think it is worth just looking at the business plan priorities as well, because that's quite interesting. And the point we're making about where the challenges are ahead is reflected to some extent within the risk rate or the RAG ratings within the business plan priorities. So you've got some things in there which are big challenges ahead, particularly around the delivering of the digital programme and so on. And that slide, it is our business plan was our business plan priorities for the year, and so that kind of gives you another way of looking at it beyond the data on the individual services.
And we're in total agreement. I didn't mean to imply for 1 minute. No. I thought all the challenges had been overcome and so on. But I do think...
Well, they haven't been overcome yet. We've got a grip on them.
So I suppose the trajectory is moving in the right... We are in agreement, I think. I think. Good. Anything else? Right. In which case, is there any other business for the board? In which case, in record time, that is the end of the board meeting, which does allow us time for questions from the public. I've only been notified of one. Robin, that was yours. Do you want to come and ask your question?
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike, Healthwatch Hertfordshire, patient representative. My question concerns the relations between CQC and the Health and Safety Executive. And my attention has been drawn to the Memorandum of Understanding, which was set up years ago, I think, to delineate those areas where there could be an overlap and the considerations that would decide which government agency would deal with which when it came to enforcement. Now, I'm wondering, in the case of hospitals, who decides when, for example, there has been a death in a secure psychiatric unit and a coroner has spoken of negligence? Who decides who will make the enforcement actions? Because it might appear to members of the public that the level of enforcement open to CQC, it was mentioned in March, I think, the financial penalty is quite low, really, whereas the level of enforcement open to the Health and Safety Executive is much greater.
So, I think there's several points in there, Robin. So, I mean, first of all, we work closely with HSE, and if you have, you said your attention has been drawn to the MOU. If you've looked at it, you will see that it's all clearly set out who does what when. And the short answer to your question is that we, CQC, lead on safety and quality of treatment and care matters involving patients. So the enforcement for those issues is absolutely with us, and that's where it should be. I think there's a second point, which is probably a misunderstanding on your part about exactly what our powers are. And we didn't have notice of this part of your question, but Rebecca, do you just want to add, because I think it's wrong to say that we necessarily have more limited financial fine possibilities, if that's the right phrase.
Yes. So just to build on what you were saying, Peter, obviously each case is different. I think what does mean that some of the fines that you see in cases that the health and safety have led goes back to the fact that there are particular sentencing guidelines which apply to those Health and Safety Act offences. We don't prosecute under the Health and Safety Act. We have a different set of offences, and so those sentencing guidelines don't apply to us. Because our prosecution powers are still, relatively speaking, new, we continue to build our own case law, and each case is still pretty different. I think the courts are still getting familiar with our offences and powers. So it may be that at some point in the future the Sentencing Guidelines Council may want to set a framework for CQC offences, but at the moment we don't have one, and I think that explains some of the differences that you see. It may also relate to the fact that powers available in the Crown Court are different to powers available in the Magistrates' Court, but I wouldn't want to comment on what's happened in any particular health and safety case.
So I think that's I think that's answers your question. But we have another. Lots of hands going up. Right. So we'll take the lady at the back or the middle row. No. So you. Thank you. And then the lady in the front row. If you could just say who you are and then ask the question.
My name's Mimi McCulloch-James, and I have to say that Mr. Appleby is the only person in this room that I've heard from today who has any inkling of what it's like to be a family member who has a relative in a mental health care unit. My brother is currently detained in one such unit. I asked for the assistance of the Care Quality Commission and was told by one of Mr. Baker's staff members, Rebecca Swallow, that she didn't want me wasting her time because the CQC does not engage in any conversations on an individual level. You do not intervene on behalf of families on an individual level. My brother at the moment is in such a state that he cannot speak in sentences. This is somebody who is a qualified chef, guitarist, composer, and at this moment cannot speak in full sentences. And the CQC, Miss Rebecca Swallow, said, "Don't want you wasting my time." We then asked for confirmation from the hospital, can they show proof of lawful detention of my older brother? Mr. Kadzirange at Shrewsbury Court Hospital in Surrey told us that we were not entitled as a family to see the documents that confirm whether or not my brother is currently lawfully detained. We asked the responsible clinician, Dr. Chowdhury, could we see the medical charts of my brother? And he said he would call security and have me removed from the hospital. We then asked the medical director of the hospital, could we attend an MDT? We were scheduled an appointment on the 8th of March. We attended that appointment and were told, no, this is not an MDT. We are tired of your family complaining. We will not be disturbing the medical professionals to have a discussion with you. And if you don't stop, we will have a meeting to serve notice on your brother to throw him out of the hospital. And we thought, great, do that. Throw him out. But of course they didn't, because it's a private hospital and they paid vast amounts of money by the NHS. And this hospital has a good rating.
So I'm going to stop you there.
Yes.
We do not, in this session, discuss individual cases, and we really can't. So I think the right way, if you want to make a complaint about CQC, is to do that, but not in this format.
The reason I did it, it's a last resort. We have made a complaint.
Well,
that's why I've come today, because we've literally come to the end of the line. My brother's mental health is deteriorating. He's been detained 18 months and deteriorating.
So I am quite clear that we have a process for dealing with your complaint. So that was the first thing I wanted to say, and that's what you need to follow. Secondly, we have our roles and responsibilities, and we need to be clear about what those are and what they aren't. So when somebody says we can't interfere in an individual case, that is because that is not our role. They shouldn't should have made that clear to you. And then I think the third thing I wanted to say is that I and I'm sure everybody in the room are extremely sorry to hear about your brother, but that, and we do need that information because the information is about providers, but it is not about our ability to deal with an individual case. So, as I say, please do make your complaint, or if you already have, then we will be responding to it. But this is not the place where we can discuss your individual situation. I'm sorry.
My question.
So,
the question was what is the role going to be given to family members to input to the CQC? That's my question. How do we input? Because at the moment there isn't. I accept what you're saying, that you don't interfere on behalf of individuals. But since you're all sitting here discussing what a fantastic job you're doing, you need to hear from the family members that you're not doing a fantastic job. So what is it that you're going to do to make a place for family members to input into your discussion so that you understand really what's happening on the ground? That's the question.
So the answer is that we are really, really keen to hear from both family members and other friends and relatives of people who are using the services, and from people themselves who are using services where they're able to give us that input. And we have a lot of that information, and that is then fed into the intelligence we use in our inspections and in our other work. So it would be quite wrong to suggest that there is no mechanism for hearing from families. We hear a great deal. But that is separate from intervening in an individual case. So I think we need to leave that there. But I do want to leave you with the thought that it really is important. I want anybody else that reads the transcript of this meeting or watches it, that getting input from people who use services is really vital to the work of the CQC. And the last thing I want anybody to go away with is the idea that we aren't interested in hearing from family members. It's really important that we do so. So I'm sorry about your situation. I'm sorry we can't discuss it further today, but thank you for coming. There was a lady in the front row. I think you wanted to ask a question. Do you want to come? Do you need to come there? You need.
I need to go there. You can't hear me.
No, you need to go there, and you need to speak into the microphone. I'm awfully sorry. So, it's not that we can't hear you, but it won't get picked up by for the recording.
I'm on record, right?
You will be on record, yes.
Right. Well, let me introduce myself. My name's Hazel Waters, and I'm a long-time carer, around 18 years, for my husband, who's got Parkinson's disease, dementia. Is in the very advanced stages of it. For nearly 10 years, I've used the same domiciliary care agency with great satisfaction because I can't, increasingly unable to care for him myself. And so I take a very keen interest in the whole field of domiciliary care. And, of course, from where I'm sitting in my home, knowing private carers, agency carers, different people, I hear an awful lot of stories about care. And some of my questions relate to issues that have already been raised. So I'll just go through my issues, and then I shall give a little supporting statement, which won't take very long. And then, hopefully, I did actually notify these questions in advance yesterday, but obviously it didn't get through. My first question relates to what appears to be a wide variation in the good rating for agencies and how the CQC is planning to tackle these anomalies. If a carer working for a domiciliary agency, despite presumably having passed DBS checks, is subsequently convicted of a criminal offence against a client, is that agency still entitled to retain outstanding on its record, or should it notify the CQC of this? Do you use experts by experience to inspect domiciliary care? And if not, perhaps there's a rationale for this that you could enlighten me. Would I, as an individual who was interviewed at length in our home concerning my husband's care, be entitled, A, to see the inspector's comments on this, and B, challenge them if I felt they were misguided, because from feedback I had, informal feedback I had from carers, I did get the impression that they were very misguided. I also understand at a wider level from my reading of the CQC website, which is not extensive, but I have tried to follow this up, that no deviation or extension from a care plan is permissible. Is this so, and does it not have unintended consequences? Those are my questions, and now my little supporting statement. It seems to me, from where I sit, that the emphasis on record keeping and maintenance now outstrips the primary purpose of those records, improving clients' care and recognising excellence or identifying shortcomings at the point of delivery. Thus, the content of documentation that has to be filled in by carers, and I have seen this increase since the very recent CQC inspection of my husband's agency. The content of the documentation that has to be filled in by carers operating on strict timetables is now excessive and takes away their time from the actual care. It is the actual reverse of the person-centred care to which lip service is paid and which depends on genuine client-carer interaction, whose content, and this is my point, may not be prescribed to the minutest detail. This results in a tick-box culture that de-skills and demoralises those involved in care at every level. The failure to see a wider picture, because I would argue of the emphasis on minutiae, is at the crux of what I see as the CQCs. Now, originally I was going to say inadequacy, but I've met you all now, and I know you're caring and you want to do the best. So I would say it's a slightly wrong trajectory. It's a wrong path. If an agency can score good when carers fail to stay the allotted time, turn up hours late at weekends so that a morning call and a lunch call effectively roll into one, have no travelling time between calls, and are fined if they drop a roster for a thing such as childcare emergency, what does good mean in that context? If an agency scores outstanding after one of its carers has been convicted of theft, what does that mean? And I'm not saying that the agency would have known, you know, this person was extremely plausible, but it just seems to me a failing. It also allows no leeway for any wider attention to individuals' well-being. The agency with which I am familiar offers regular, fully funded events for clients with entertainment, etc., such as a 3-course Christmas dinner. Yet apparently this is not relevant to any assessment of the agency, whereas not documenting the brand of thickener that is added to my husband's drinks is. There appears to be no facility on the CQC website for a member of the public to raise concerns about the CQC's direction itself, which is why I've come here today. And I did raise this issue very briefly at a meeting at Portcullis House, which was arranged by the all-party parliamentary working group on working age social care, but it didn't get, you know, it was right at the end of the session. So that is my statement.
Thank you. Could I just ask, you said you put all these questions in to us yesterday, but they haven't reached us. So
no,
how did you send them to us?
I emailed the Secretariat.
Okay, well, we will...
So I'm sorry about that, because I meant to do it first thing in the morning, and then I did it... My purse got stolen, so I did it sort of, when I got back home. So it was not...
for whatever reason, that has not reached us.
Hang on, it's Wednesday. I did it on Monday. I think I did it on Monday. It's Monday afternoon. Do you want them in writing?
Well, if you've got them in writing, that would be great. Or if you can resend your email, because we never reached it. Yes. What I was going to then say is that I think there are so many points in what you've raised, and they're important points, that we ought to... we will reply to you in writing. I don't think we can do it justice without notice right now. But I think there is one point I did just want to make, and probably perhaps just to close the meeting on this, but it goes back a little bit to the previous point. You know, we really do want information from people like you, and we do take very seriously the information that we get. So I don't, again, want anybody to go away with the sense that the information from people who are either themselves service users or are relatives of or friends of service users is not really important to inform the way we go about our work. So that's a sort of general point, but there are a lot of specifics that you've raised which will come back to you in writing. So, David, you want to ask a question? So can we get one last question, because we've got time, if you wouldn't mind just...
Thank you, yes. Right. I'm getting all ready for a debate now.
David Hogarth, Neighbour Care, St John's Wood and Maida Vale. I was very impressed with what Lewis, the point Lewis suggested that in the strategy, the next strategy, good should be redefined. And as I have said in the past, there are quite a lot of cases, two of which have been mentioned by the two previous speakers, where good is very likely misapplied. I'm not sure whether it applies to all the directorates. My examples that I did collect a couple of years ago were mostly about adult social care. Of course, there has been, some of you may be aware, the petition has been circulated by somebody called Tanya Taylor, whose father was abused in a care home, and yet the CQC had said that it was good. I don't know how long before that the inspection had taken place before the abuse happened, but I don't think that you would really feel that was a satisfactory situation. Of course, if it was a one-off, you could say, well, it is a one-off, but it does seem to happen quite a bit, and I wonder if it isn't that you need to think not only how good should be redefined, but also about the questions of how you find out whether a place is really good or not, because you can't really just walk into a care home where they are more or less expecting you and necessarily see the kind of things that happen at 2 o'clock in the morning when the night staff are on. So, you know, I do recognise that the CQC wants to do a good job and wants to stamp out abuse and neglect. I just wonder if you had any ideas about how you might achieve this.
So I think what Lewis was saying is right, and I don't think, Lewis, you said we should redefine it. You said that we should be thinking about whether we should redefine it. And I think there's a lot of work we're going to be doing to lead up to the next strategy, which doesn't, you know, we've got the present strategy we've still got to deliver, got to implement the present strategy. That runs until 2021. After that, we will have a new strategy. The next couple of years, we need to be thinking about lots of issues, some of which have been raised by the board this morning, some of which you've just raised, and other issues as well. So I think it's something that we absolutely need to be thinking about. And as I was saying at the end of our discussion about the performance report, and Paul Rue commented on this as well, you know, we are by no means complacent. I do think that this organisation has come a long way and it's doing a lot of good stuff, and the trajectory is in the right direction. That is not to say that any of us think it's perfect, and we're not at all complacent. So I think we will go on working out how we can get better at what we do on a continuous basis. Ian, you wanted to say something, and then that is the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Peter. I think it is just worth remembering that as a regulator, we are part of a group of people that keep people safe. And in that sense, I mean, there's a responsibility on those people that work in locations to make sure that if they see things that are going wrong, that they report them. So we have in our board performance report our performance around how we deal with whistleblowers, and we encourage people to talk to us about what's going on inside and inside a particular setting, because quite often this abuse doesn't go on its own. It's not a single individual. Other people will be aware of it. We also, as Peter said a couple of times now, we really value the input from individuals who are perhaps relatives or friends of people who are being cared for, and if they see something that's wrong, then we get many thousands of calls every year. We get contacts through our website where people talk to us about their experience of care, and then we feed that into our assessments of particular institutions. Sometimes that triggers an immediate re-inspection of a location. Sometimes it's something that we aggregate with other pieces of information, and that may bring forward an inspection and so forth. Other times we hold on to it until we're next in that location. So it is really important, but we are part of almost a triumvirate of people, the employees of the institution, the friends and relatives, as well as us working together alongside others such as commissioners and so on. So this is not something that, whenever we talk about abuse, this isn't something that we as an organisation are going to be able to solve on our own. This is part of a group of people working together to try and sort that out. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, board. And could I just say to the board, we need to start again in half an hour. That's all right, 1:45? Lovely. Thank you all very much indeed.